Hello, comrades, and welcome back to Ushanka show. Здравствуйте, дорогие товарищи. My name is Sergey, and I was born in the USSR. Just a friendly reminder that my book American Diaries is available on Amazon.com, or shoot me an email if you would like to have a signed copy. Thank you.
Вы смотрите программу Ushanka Show.
So today I would like to dig a little bit deeper into the topic of the Soviet housing. If you want to learn about history of my family, how we managed to get our nice 3-room apartment in Kiev back in 1980s, you can check out my video number 49, Soviet Mortgage, how my family got the apartment. So there I covered my history of the housing, but we're gonna talk general about it in this video. If you're interested in the Soviet Union, you probably heard quite a bit that Soviet Union offered free housing for its citizens. This misconception, that lie, is being repeated over and over again, especially by those so-called sovkadrochery. And a quick Russian language refresher, we already learned this word before, sovkadrocher. So that's the people who think the Soviet Union was amazing, life was perfect, and it's kind of a rude word because it means that you rubbing your one off when you think about life in the Soviet Union. So Sovka Drocher. So once again, there was no free housing in the Soviet Union. What we had, I would call heavily subsidized rent. In socialist society, there is no private property. So Soviet citizens couldn't own their apartments. So once you get a permission to move in some apartment, you live there and you pay rent every month. So here's a good example about the cost of owning apartment or renting apartment in Soviet Union. It's actual apartment bill. It combines all the fees that you occur while you live there, and it includes heating, electricity, radio tochka, if you remember my video about it, the radio, and so on. So for 5 people, it's a 2-room apartment, I assume. It says the dimensions, the size of apartment is 41.3 square meters, or it's approximately 440 square feet. So if 5 people live in that size of apartment, as I said, I assume it's a 2-room apartment, because average Soviet apartment for 1 room was about 30 square meters. 2-room about 40 to 45. So you have 2-room apartment, 5 people share it, and so that's like 86 square feet per person. Now, like average American house is 2,000 square feet for a family. So this is, we're talking about an apartment which is 5 times smaller, and they pay 21 ruble a month. And here they claim that families' average income about 400 rubles a month, which is a little bit of kind of high number, but whatever. If we take that number, like my family was making about 300 rubles a month. So paying 21 ruble with income of 400 ruble, it's about 5% of your income goes to your housing. So as you see, it's pretty cheap, and we're talking including heating, rent, electricity, and so on. So that looks really cheap, but you need to keep in mind we're talking about tiny apartment. 440 square feet, 2-room for 5 people. It's, to kind of compare, I can think of this. It's like claiming that owning Ford Fiesta 2-door and cramming 5 people in it. So look how cheap it is comparing if you have some big SUV and you have a nice room for 5 people. So of course, big SUV will cost you way more money versus having a little tiny car. So when we compare cost, like housing cost in Soviet Union, you need to keep in mind it was very small. Even ceilings were really low. So it was tiny apartments, crammed, and cheap. Okay, so let's analyze this bill. It's kind of interesting, and I'm kind of detail-oriented person, so it may be boring for some of you guys, but let's take a look. This is the average housing bill for the Soviet family. 5 people living in a small 2-room apartment, 440 square feet size. So here we go. Kvartplata. So this is actual rent Payment for apartment 5 rubles 45 kopecks. Next line, отопление, heating, 2 rubles 97 kopecks, almost 3 rubles. So heating, usually it's a central boiler and it sends water, hot water, and you have hot water batteries like cast iron, very, very, very ineffective. So 297. Then we have вода и канализация, so water and sewage, 4 rubles 65 kopecks, so almost a ruble per person for water supply, and it'll be hot and cold water and then sewage. Next line, освещение, which is electricity, but it's actually, you translate it as a light, освещение, but it's actually electricity. And it's interesting, in the left lane it says 4, which means it's 4 kopecks per kilowatt. And on the top it says that they used up 448 kilowatt or something. So they paid 3 rubles 38 kopecks. So that's the only thing that we could control. When you live in an apartment, you can use less electricity if you turn your switches off. Oh, next line. Radio. 50 kopecks. So half of the ruble to have, remember we already talked about it many times. So your radio going into each apartment, that fixed line, similar to phone line, but it'll be radio line, and it's a 50 kopecks every month. Next line is gas. So they had natural gas, and it's 1 ruble 65 kopecks. So it's nice to have central natural gas supply. And I said there's no meter, it's just a fixed rate every month. Next line, горячая вода, hot water. So here I should look in advance, but so you have a water and sewage earlier, but now this is a separate line just for the hot water supply. And it's a 2 rubles 15 kopecks. And the last line is коллективная антенна. So this is a collective TV antenna. I think this is the word, right? So on top of the building, there'll be a big antenna to get a TV signal over the air. And this is 25 kopecks per month. So here you are. There's your cost for the tiny 440 square foot apartment, 2-room apartment. Then you have a kitchen, then you have a bathroom. 5 people crammed in that. They pay 21 ruble a month, which amounted about 5 to 10% of their income. And after you fill this form, you actually take this paper to Sberkassa, to the local bank. And as we had only one bank in Soviet Union called Sberbank, so Sberkassa, that's the place like there where you go and you pay cash, because it's only use cash. You bring this paper and they show you that this is how much you used up every month. The only number usually is changing just electricity, and then you pay your total in Sberkassa. And quite often you can spend 1 hour or 30 minutes just staying in line with other people who pay in their housing bill. So how would you get an apartment in Soviet Union? And we're talking about cities right now, okay? Not like country, villages, cities. But first of all, you had to have the job. So you get a job, and then you find out where is that list, and you put yourself on the waiting list to get an apartment. And depends at the factory or whatever place of work you get, list can be as long as 20 years to wait for your apartment. For example, my father, he worked at the Kiev Antonov airplane factory, and they had 20 years waiting list. And at my mother's place of work, she worked actually at kind of like a construction company. They were designing new apartment buildings, and that place was also, it's called DSK, Домостроительный комбинат, so home building, almost like factory, but they call it kombinat. So they were pouring walls, which were used to build the buildings. They had no waiting list at all available. So you get the job at construction company, but there was no chance to get housing through that company because they had no housing available, period. So not every place of work would offer you free housing. The easiest way to get housing and the quickest way would be joining military. Some Soviet officers, They didn't have to wait for long, especially the ones that were reassigned from place to place. Soviet army had their own buildings in every city. Like when I lived in Kiev, apartment next to our apartment, whole house was dedicated just to military families. So military families would get housing pretty quick. You also need to keep in mind that there were limits how many rooms you can get based on the size of your family. So for example, if it's just a young family, 2 people, you're only allowed to have 1-room apartment. And I mean 1 room. So that's not like 1 bedroom and a living room, just 1 room. If you have 3 people, max 2-room apartment. 4 people, max 3-room apartment. So there were those limits as well as waiting list. And now the most interesting part. So picture you living, for example, in Moscow or Leningrad, and you retire, you have your nice little 2-room apartment, and suddenly your husband or your wife started having health issues, cough, and you go to a doctor, and doctor says, this climate, like Leningrad, St. Petersburg, has a pretty poor climate. It's a lot of humidity. In the winter, when it's cold, it's humid, so it's bad for your lungs. So doctor says you need to move down south where its air is dry and warm, because you will have a lot of troubles if you remain here in Leningrad. So you need to move. And here's a dilemma. You cannot sell your apartment because it technically doesn't belong to you. You have propiska, so you have the right to live in that apartment. But if you move out, you have to give it back to the government because you don't own it. In a regular capitalist society, you just sell your apartment in Leningrad or New York and you move down to Florida, you buy yourself a house or condo in Florida and you're all set. Soviet people couldn't do that. What they had to do is to go through this painful process of exchanging apartments. So you post an ad in your local newspaper. For example, you decided to move down south to Crimea to call it Yalta or Sevastopol. So you place the newspaper ad in Sevastopol and you say, I have apartment for exchange. I need to move down south. So I'm offering 3 or 2-room apartment in Leningrad for 2-room apartment in Sevastopol or something like that. So Soviet government allowed this kind of exchanges. And of course, here we have these market forces, because if you exchange some not major city like Leningrad or Moscow apartment into something like middle of nowhere town, your apartment is worth technically more. So people would exchange maybe a 1-room apartment in Moscow to 3-room apartment in small town or something like that. So there was this market forces going on in the background, but officially you're supposed to exchange only like for like. And of course, money or car would be involved. So for example, if you want to move to Moscow and you have propiska, you might trade your 3-room apartment in Sevastopol for 2-room apartment in Moscow, and you might need to add some cash under table because officially you cannot buy apartment, right? Or you might have like, okay, I have a 2-room apartment and a car, and if you give me a 2-room apartment in Moscow, you'll get 2-room apartment in Zhiguli here in Sevastopol. So there was really this cumbersome, complicated system exchanging apartments all over Soviet Union. But people didn't move a lot, but still people had to move. They had to go through all this pain, all that trouble. Now, out of the country, it was a little bit different. So you never owned the land, but you kind of owned the house. So for example, when my grandfather, Sergei, got married and needed his own place, he actually used the old barn. He took it apart and then he built a little house. He asked permission from the local kolkhoz to give him a small lot, and then he erected house on it, made windows. So he turned it from the little barn, sarai, he turned it into a house. So in the villages, you could actually buy and sell those houses, but of course, they had no running water. They had outhouses. The only conveniences they had inside was electricity and radio tochka, and some people had like gas, but it would be in the balloons in a tank, small tank. There you have a natural gas or propane to have for your cooking. So most people in Soviet Union, if they could, they preferred to live in apartment buildings because that meant you had a hot water, cold water, you had natural gas or electricity for cooking. So you had all these conveniences. You had indoor plumbing, you had indoor bathroom. And if you live out in the country, have your own house, that means you have no running water, outhouse. So, and people, even to wash yourself, you just go to community bathroom like banya place. But everyone preferred to live in apartment buildings. And since there was no private property, we didn't have property tax. So this is kind of a new thing for me in America, to learn about property tax and see where is it going. In Soviet Union, if you own a house out in the country, you don't pay any property tax. So that was nice. And speaking of conveniences, the only meters we used to have in our apartments was electric meters. So электросчетчик. So I kind of grew up with this mentality that we always turn the lights off when we don't need them because it costs money, right? But when it came to water usage, hot water or cold water, we didn't have a personal individual water heaters. It was a central supply, so you have one pipe of hot water coming in an apartment and one cold. Water was pretty much unlimited. There was no meter, and the fee was based on how many people live in an apartment. And similar situation was with natural gas. Like my apartment in Kiev, we have natural gas, so we never had a meter either. It was also based on how many people live in an apartment. You can, cook day and night, have that gas burning. Cost is the same. So of course, people never cared about that. They never bothered about saving natural gas because who cares? And actually, I recall my shock when I was in school. We had to read. I don't remember who was the author. Maybe it was Jack London, but there was quite a depressing story about this family, maybe American or British family, and this little girl trying to cook some food for her little brother, for herself. I don't remember, but the meter stopped the flow of gas because they used up their allowance, and she's desperate to cook. And she started pounding on that meter, and somehow it opened again, and she had some gas to cook. And I was so shocked, like, oh my God, how can you live like that? To have a meter that can stop on you and waiting for you to drop more money, otherwise there'll be no gas to use. That was a real shock for my young Soviet brain. Of course, right now situations changed drastically in former Soviet Union. Like my family, my brother and my dad, they installed gas meter. So now they pay only what they use because it was cheaper than pay average. They installed water meter, so they pay for amount of water they use. And once again, they installed their own water heater because it was cheaper to just pay for cold water and pay for electricity to heat the water than pay average for hot water. So once the situation changed and now it's all coming out of your pocket, there's more average, there's no more Soviet lifestyle, everything is metered. It's more people making sense for people to install their own meters and measure what they use instead of this unlimited usage we used to have during the Soviet Union. Okay, well, I hope you guys enjoyed this story. Maybe you learned something new. As always, don't forget to like this video, share with your friends. I love reading your comments, and we'll talk to you soon. До свидания. Goodbye. Hey, by the way, a cool merch for cool comrades is available at the Ushanka store at teespring.com. And if you love my channel and would like to show your support, please click on the link below this video and become the patron of the Ushanka show. For as little as $1, you can help us grow and create the new, interesting videos about the life in Soviet Union.